Our officers need help. They need help. They need help with gun control. They need help with keeping these weapons out of these people's hands.
You're liars. FEMA are nothing but liars.
If there are hecklers, if there are people acting out, I can't even hear them because I'm way louder than them.
Hours after President Trump baited Israel to block Representatives Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib from entering, Israel's doing just that. The two Democrats are vocal supporters of Palestinians and were set to visit the West Bank Sunday. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, quote, "Israel is open to any critic and criticism, with one exception, a law banning anyone who's backed the movement to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel over its treatment of Palestinians."
A little over 6 months ago, I announced my run for president. In almost every regard, this journey has been more exciting and more rewarding than I ever imagined.
Former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper announced the biggest news out of his presidential campaign yet. He's ending it. The third Democrat to drop out so far, Hickenlooper struggled to reach the polling threshold, and the unique donors needed to make the next round of debates. And he's not alone. 13 others have just 15 days to turn things around. Italy's Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte announced that 6 European countries have agreed to take the 147 migrants on board a Spanish charity ship, ending a 2-week standoff between the Open Arms and Italy's anti-immigrant interior minister. Matteo Salvini failed twice to make his decrees prohibiting the ship from entering Italy's waters stick. The first was overruled in court, and the country's defense minister refused to co-sign the second. The FDA wants American cigarette packs to include graphic warnings, like they do in most countries. A law passed 10 years ago required them, but tobacco companies challenged the FDA's proposed images, saying they violated the First Amendment. Courts agreed, but said the FDA was free to propose new warnings, which it didn't do for 3 years, until public health groups sued, forcing the agency to release a new proposal by today.
In 2016, the tiny West Virginia town of Richwood was hit by a massive flood. Things haven't gone so well since then. Much of the reconstruction from the flood remains unfinished, and the city is bitterly divided.
Nothing's done. Nothing's done.
You're liars. FEMA are nothing but liars.
Now, the whole process is the subject of an 18-month audit into the town's handling of federal disaster money. And 3 city officials, including 2 mayors, are facing criminal charges.
Order.
Objection.
Andrew, how are you today?
Doing pretty good, you?
Well, it's been a different day. Okay.
Lloyd Atkins has been the dentist of Richwood for more than 40 years.
Listen, your articular eminence is not high enough. This is the way God made you.
He's also the county commissioner.
So I'll see you next winter. Okay. All right. Thank you much.
When the flood came, Adkins volunteered to help figure out how to work with FEMA to put everything together again.
We didn't have any electricity. We didn't have any food. We didn't have any water. Okay. And Richwood was simply over their head to start with. They cried out to the state, but there wasn't anyone that came.
Does anyone in this town have experience of working with FEMA?
Not really.
Is anyone in the city council a lawyer or an accountant?
No. Okay.
Along with others, like an insurance agent and a traveling salesman, Adkins sat on a committee that oversaw how the town should spend the $3 million that FEMA allocated for its recovery. Richwoodians were doing what people in a small town are so good at when disaster strikes: calling on their community. That's how Chuck Tosing, who runs the public pool, got it mud-free and back open in just 3 weeks.
There's no pamphlet that says this is how you recover from the flood. So you have to rely on the information that comes from the people who came into town.
Is the point that this is very complicated stuff?
Oh yeah, it's super complicated.
FEMA rules are complicated. They also don't always fit the reality of life in small towns. One rule bars the use of FEMA funds to enrich family and friends, making it hard to bid out contracts.
Richwood is a small town, 1,800 people, right? We're in a natural disaster.
We need to get things fixed. If you're in rural Appalachia and you're going to find someone who does some job that you need done, they're probably going to be a friend.
Another thing is that FEMA only pays for 75% of recovery in West Virginia, leaving towns to cover the rest. Tiny Richwood, with an annual budget of about $1 million, didn't have that kind of cash lying around.
Debris cleanup for this city was a little over $700,000. Well, the city doesn't have the finances for that. They may have had $50,000 in the bank. They literally borrowed from Peter to pay Paul. They borrowed from different funds, okay? They mixed their monies, which they shouldn't have done.
Right.
But that's why they did it, okay?
Because they're
just trying to get it done.
That didn't look right to state auditors, who in late 2017 opened an investigation.
They did not have a good system of accountability. They didn't have a really good system of procurement. There was no checks and balances to make sure that monies weren't going towards friends, families, associates, high school buddies.
Are you confident that crimes were committed in Richwood?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, unequivocally.
Defense said on this side over here.
The final audit resulted in charges of embezzlement and fraud against several officials. They all deny the charges. But the larger problem it exposed was systemic. In an effort to meet FEMA's standards, the town hired private disaster consultants at a cost of $250,000. The audit found their advice wasn't always so great. And it said their very existence, part of a booming industry, meant the state wasn't doing enough to guide towns through the process. Richwood's consultants didn't want to speak on camera. Neither did FEMA. Daniel Craig, a FEMA disaster consultant, has sat on both sides of the desk as a former director of FEMA's recovery division.
Hire a consultant means you can probably speed your reimbursement. It can quicken your recovery processes, hopefully, if you have a good consultant. But every consultant has good days and bad days, I must say.
Why doesn't FEMA do all that for towns?
So think of how many towns have a disaster. FEMA has tens of thousands of applicants every year. There's just not enough people to do that training.
It sounds like for these towns, their only hope is to hire some outside consultant to help them figure this out.
Which is true, but you also have to remember, they got to pay us. So some of these small communities, it's very difficult.
Are consultants, in a way, a little like ambulance chasers?
Yes. It's kind of, I would absolutely say they're kind of like that, because you are following storm. We're there to help people, to get them through the worst points in their life. I hope the system gets to the point where all recovery really happens local, that you don't necessarily need the federal government.
West Virginia apparently had the same idea. Just as the audit recommended, the state is now offering towns disaster management training. But all that will take time, and until the system is fixed, small towns like Richwood and their local officials are going to keep making mistakes and paying for them.
Well, this one was a furniture store, okay, and H&P was here. And we actually had a hotel here, okay?
Oh, really?
Yeah, all really snazzy hotel.
The state says there's some malfeasance here.
Yes.
Do you think it was malicious, though? Do you feel like that?
No. Those people busted their butts, okay? Did they do everything by the books? Certainly not, okay? The people were just trying to survive and get the town back up on its feet again.
It's been a summer punctuated by gunfire. Tragedies from Gilroy to Chicago, from El Paso to Dayton, and yesterday's incident in Philadelphia have renewed calls for Congress to do something about gun violence.
But our officers need help. They need help. They need help with gun control. They need help with keeping these weapons out of these people's hands.
One potential something is the return of the assault weapons ban, which was law of the land from 1994 to 2004. It was passed as part of a sweeping Clinton-era crime bill.
There are still far too many children in harm's way, too many families behind locked doors, too many guns in the hands of too many criminals.
The bill stopped the production and sale of some assault weapons, as well as high-capacity magazines. The ban had a sunset provision, which kicked in during 2004, effectively ending a 10-year experiment. If you want to convince people to bring back the ban, the natural question now is, did it work? But figuring out the answer to that is kind of difficult, in part because for more than 20 years, Congress included a provision in funding bills that stops federal dollars from being used to advocate for gun control. That's more or less ended attempts by the federal government to research gun violence prevention. Now, that doesn't mean work wasn't ever done. The National Institute of Justice funded multiple studies between 1997 and 2004 by criminology professor Christopher Coper to study the effects of the assault weapons ban. In one chapter of the 2013 book, Reducing Gun Violence in America, Coper writes, quote, "The ban did not appear to affect gun crime during the time it was in effect." But in a later study, published in 2017, he gives the ban more credit by pointing to how bad things have gotten since the ban ended. He writes, while more research is needed, there is, quote, "evidence that the federal ban curbed the spread of high-capacity semi-automatic weapons." So did the assault weapons ban work? Maybe. I spoke with John Turris, a political science professor at LaGrange College in Georgia, who's more definitive in his analysis than Coper. He dug through a database of mass shootings compiled by, no, not the US government, but a liberal magazine.
I looked at the Mother Jones study, which both liberals and conservatives have cited, and that looks at all shootings from 1982 to 2019. So before the assault weapons ban went into effect, we had 19 shootings with 1.46 on average every year. During the assault weapons ban, we had, of 10 years, 15 shootings or 1.5. I looked at the number of deaths per year. Before the ban, it was 11.46 per year on average. It was 9.2 per year during the ban.
Turris found that from the time the ban ended until now, there have been 81 mass shootings resulting in 655 deaths. That comes out to 5.4 shootings and 43.6 deaths per year, though not all of them were done with assault weapons.
During the ban, the differences were not that great. However, after the ban, the data is overwhelmingly in favor of things getting worse by letting it expire. When you start looking at what happened in 2005 all the way through 2019, that's the strongest evidence for me that the gun ban, rescinding that, did not work.
But okay, so assault weapons ban, a good thing. Well, I talked to one more professor who studies this stuff, Franklin Zimring at UC Berkeley's law school.
The question of whether there was an effect that you could tie to the tail of that law being passed gets to be very difficult if what you're trying to do is a body count. If, on the other hand, you're asking, did the number of those weapons being introduced in the United States during that period of time go down, then the answer is yes.
So if you narrow the question to, did the ban stop guns from being made, which means there were fewer weapons out there to kill people, then yeah, that limited effect alone may make it worth fighting for another ban. But what's really clear is that there isn't one thing you can point to that absolutely proves the ban worked. Politicians will have to rely on people, polling, and their gut to figure out what to do. And maybe while they're considering that, they should consider funding research into this epidemic so they can make decisions based on, data.
मोदी जी ने बहुत अच्छा किया है 370 हटा के अपनों को देश आज़ाद करा दिया है तो अपना देश बहुत आगे पहुंचेगा और बहुत आगे के इतना आगे के कोई बच्चा भी याद करेगा अपने मोदी जी के नाम को याद करेगा। आतंकवाद समाप्त हो जाएगा सर, बिल्कुल कुछ भी नहीं बचेगा, खल्लास बिल्कुल खत्म हो जाएगा। जय हिंद, जय भारत। भारत माता की जय, भारत माता की जय, भारत माता की जय।
It's Independence Day in India. But in the nation's capital, it feels like a victory rally for re-elected Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his radical revision to India's constitution.
आज हर हिंदुस्तानी कह सकता है, one nation, one constitution.
Modi and his unchallenged Hindu Nationalist Party unilaterally revoked Article 370, which granted autonomy to Jammu and Kashmir, India's only Muslim-majority state.
और मोदी जी ने इतना अच्छा कार्य किया है जो देश में किसी ने नहीं किया। मैं तो ये कहता हूँ मोदी जी भगवान के समान है आज हिंदुस्तान के लिए। कहीं ना कहीं टेररिज्म खत्म होगा और वो जहाँ तक उम्मीद है अब की बार तो कश्मीर हमारा है और अब की बार पीओके जो कश्मीर वो भी हमारा है, उस पर बात करेंगे और जहाँ तक उम्मीद है मोदी जी जल्दी से जल्दी वो भी हमारा ही होगा।
The Prime Minister claims it's all about economic development and national security. But the changes mean that Kashmiris will lose exclusive rights to their lands and their representation in parliament. While Delhi was out celebrating, the festivities in Kashmir's capital were orchestrated and largely missing the people who live there, Kashmiris. This is the 11th day of a lockdown. An extra 35,000 troops were moved into the valley. A complete communications blackout was put into effect. Opposition leaders were arrested, and large public gatherings were banned. But last Friday, thousands of Kashmiris took advantage of weekly prayers to protest on the streets of Srinagar. Some were waving Pakistani flags, and a few unfurled banners of a local Islamic State affiliate. At first, India denied any of this even happened, calling international media reports, quote, fabricated, and said there were only a few stray protests, no larger than 20 people. Days later, they conceded that, quote, miscreants mingled and had caused widespread unrest. The government might insist that the protesters are just an angry few, but people here are livid.
That is all bullshit. This is all bullshit.
Hamida Naeem teaches at the local university.
They are actually hiding a dark Hindu fantasy of destroying Kashmiri Muslims and reducing them to a minuscule minority so that they can always rule them and they will be enslaved. Overnight, their identity, their dignity, their everything has been lost. Kashmir has a 5,000 years history as a country. All that goes down the drain with the scrapping of this. We have been reduced to subjects from citizens.
Today, Pakistan's army said that 3 of their soldiers and 5 Indian soldiers died in a cross-border shootout. Counterterrorism experts like Dr. Ajay Sani warn that the uptick of violence between Pakistan and India over Kashmir will only get worse. And that just might be what Modi wants.
You are creating a dynamic which is pushing violence forward. Why is that done? That is also done deliberately to provoke this violence. So you create this whole demonization of the Muslim, which assists in your Hindutva consolidation.
Warped Tour was the longest-running touring music festival in the country, where bands like No Doubt, Sublime, and Katy Perry got their big break. It was also a rite of passage for people on the fringes.
It's just been an inspiration, got me through a lot of really shitty times, so.
A safe haven for those who felt alienated by mainstream culture, where they could dance out their feelings, maybe violently.
We get to be ourselves, you know? People see you wearing patches and all that, they fucking look at you all weird and shit. In here, everyone's the same.
Warped Tour Beach!
Proud for us.
You're welcome. Thank you, Kevin, Fred. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it, man. Have a good day. Thank you.
But last summer, Kevin Lyman, the tour's founder, announced he was ending it.
You guys can take over. You guys are in charge now.
It was the last festival of its kind, with cheap tickets and shows across the country.
Have your tickets out ready, please! Perfect!
Less than a year later, Lyman brought it back as 25th anniversary shows in New Jersey, Ohio, and California.
Hey, this year's my 18th year at Warped Tour, brother. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Thank you, brother.
I made Warped Tour because I worked in the Los Angeles punk scene. I used to work at 320 shows a year. And I thought kids were kind of all the same, but they might be listening to metal, they might be listening to punk, they might be listening to reggae. And I said, maybe I can bring all these sounds together.
Lyman ended Warped Tour because of its dwindling clout. The tour made $25 million at its peak, but in 2017, attendance hit its lowest point since 1999 and only grossed about $9 million. What does it say about the music industry that Warped Tour is going away?
That 14 to 17-year-old that we were always kind of refueling our audience with is gone. You have Netflix, you have streaming, and unless you're kicking and screaming to go to a live event, your parents are probably not going to, and they felt safe that their kids were in their bedrooms, that they weren't going out.
But that same year, Coachella made a record-breaking 9 figures. A sign fans want more pop and hip-hop.
Warped Tour, when it first started, was the place where you discovered bands. There'd be 40, 50 bands playing that you'd never heard of, and it's all really cool word of mouth. Everybody's like, oh, have you heard of Dead Sarah? Never seen them. They're playing in 5 minutes. Let's go check them out. And that kind of changed a lot over the years, but so did the world, I think.
Warped coincidentally ended at the height of Me Too, when many institutions, like Vice, were scrutinized for how they treated women. So Warped Tour's past was re-examined too, like an incident in 2015 when an artist called Front Porch Step was accused of sexual misconduct with minors. He denied it. Lyman let him play anyway. Me Too didn't kill Warped Tour, but it is indicative of a broader cultural change, in which women's experience and taste in money counts just as much as men's.
It's such a sensitive time in the world we live in, and I think that's good in a lot of ways, empowering for a lot of people to kind of take a divergent look at big situations in a way that we hadn't before. But whenever there is disrespectful behavior, I think it should be addressed in a productive and adult way, and people should have to pay the price for bad mistakes.
Do you think the punk community, defining itself as anti-establishment, is therefore resistant to criticism from the outside?
Maybe a little bit, but it's a strange contradiction to be anti-establishment in punk rock when it's like sponsored by Target, brought to you by Walmart. It's all horseshit in my mind.
While the alleged sexual misconduct didn't happen at Warped, Lyman still had to defend his decisions. His response that sexual harassment was part of the culture didn't help. Do you think the criticism that Warped Tour was insufficiently responsive to sexual harassment, sexual assault, do you think that's fair?
No.
Why not?
Because it didn't happen on my tour. I believe in due process. I believe we have bad elements in every bit of society. The Warped Tour has always been a place for women to find their first foot into the business. It's being run by women. They're here. We have bad eggs in every part of society. We, as a punk community, used to deal with it a certain way. If I saw someone that was out of line, they were taken out of the community, maybe in a way that some people want to know.
Crack some skulls?
Maybe some threat of cracking skulls. Maybe putting them in a cab and giving the cab driver $100 to remove them and never come back.
Do you have a feeling like that the criticism on the internet is real?
I'm really not here to discuss criticism. Some of it was real, absolutely, and you learn from it. A lot of it was bullshit.
Do you think it's possible to celebrate the legacy of Warped Tour while still acknowledging some criticisms of failings?
If you look at, when you have 12 million people that have come to a show, and I would say it was a handful of problems that got a lot of press because it was written. Does it outweigh everything? Go out there and talk to the kids that come to the show. Go out there and talk to these people about their lives and maybe how this affected them.
So we did that, and it's complicated. And most people there wanted to have uncomplicated fun. Like in the last year, there's been a little bit of a conversation about sometimes places like the Warped Tour weren't friendly to women. Did that cross your mind when you guys came here?
I mean, I'm always worried about things happening, but I'm here for a good time, not to be worried and scared for like what might happen.
Yeah.
I just focus on like hanging out with my friends and having a good time.
Being the only girls in an ocean of men is a feeling, you know, you feel something, yeah.
Outnumbered all the
Yeah.
time. I don't know if they made an effort, but we definitely see a lot more women
it's
this
getting
year.
better.
Did you always feel welcome as women within that culture?
I mean, I've always felt like, if anything, it was kind of special because we were the only ones.
What do you think the legacy of Warped Tour is? And do you think it tarnishes the legacy to also talk about the problems with treatment of women within the tour?
Well, it's not necessarily the tarnishing. This is a story that has continued, you know. We're slowly seeing more and more of us. The cool thing about putting on a show is that we're the ones with the microphones. We are the loud ones. And so if there are hecklers, if there are people acting out, I can't even hear them because I'm way louder than them, and it's nice to have that power.